Hello, everyone. My name is Fear Dragon, and I am joined here by an absolutely stellar guest. It is going to be Kevin Dong, who's actually going to be leading a lot of the design choices for the competitive modes of Frost Giant's new RTS title, Stormgate. Kevin, how you doing? I spoke with you not too long ago on some of the co-op stuff, and it's good to have you back.
Great to be back as always, Fear Dragon. And who knows when we last spoke? It could have been 15 minutes ago. It could have been a year ago. It could have been an eon ago.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to talk to you as always.
Any amount of time could have passed, but we'll say that it's been a day or two and pretend like we're going to be moving into a brand new discussion, because this is going to be a different topic. Last time we talked about co-op, and now we're actually going to be talking a lot more about the competitive modes available. And I think one of the most interesting things that you guys have actually mentioned, at least to me, one of the most interesting things, is that it's not just going to be a competitive 1v1 RTS. You guys are actually exploring 3v3 and other kind of RTS potential competitive modes. And I think that's pretty unusual. I don't think I've seen too many RTS titles. I've tried to dive super deep into that. And I know you're an old school like RTS nerd and everything, so you know about the Brood War 2v2 scene, Warcraft 3 and everything, but this definitely feels a little bit different. So can you talk to me a little bit more about kind of that decision to explore that as an option?
Yeah, so I would say overall, we at Stormgate, we're really trying to be the first truly social RTS. And I don't know how much we want to go into the kind of spiel that I went to in the last video, but even though it's a multiplayer game, even though there's chat and there's lobbies and everything, StarCraft 2 can often feel like a very lonely experience. And I think in the past few years, we really are in the advent of a truly social era of gaming, with the advent of MOBAs, for instance, with the advent of Among Us, with Fall Guys that were really popular during the pandemic. We really believe in the power of social gaming, and we hope that it can be a better, less intimidating experience for players, and also be a more viral experience for players that allows players to onboard their friends into the game. And with that in mind, we want to be the first RTS to kind of design a team mode from the ground up, team mode that's going to be 3v3. Our thought process is that, almost every RTS, in fact, I can't think of another RTS where the team mode is not just copy and pasted game rules from the 1v1 game mode. And if you look at StarCraft, you can the best example from StarCraft is the idea of creep, and that you're not allowed to build on your allies' creep. StarCraft and StarCraft 2 specifically were created with the design of 1v1 is truly the real game mode, and the other ones are, I feel, more of an afterthought. Whereas with our game mode, with our 3v3 game mode, we're going to try to design it from the ground up such that it makes sense from the 3v3 perspective.
Oh, that's super interesting. I guess I have to ask one of the most obvious questions here. Are you expecting that there could be a potential deviation between like the 1v1 and 3v3 modes, similar to how, I guess, like in StarCraft 2, co-op or like a lot of the campaign experience is different from the multiplayer experience?
Yeah, so one thing we're going to try to do is divorce the game rules from 1v1 and 3v3. In 1v1, for instance, our 1v1 game mode is still going to appeal to very hardcore RTS audiences, very similar to that of Warcraft 3 or StarCraft 2, in which the win objective, at least right now, is going to be something very similar to what I call annihilation. You eliminate your opponent's buildings in order to win the game. We feel like that particularly doesn't work for 3v3 as well, because if you look at it from just a gaming perspective, RTS is really the only team game in which, in order to win the game, you're encouraged to fully eliminate one of the players on the opposing team. If you take a look at MOBAs, or you take a look at FPS, for instance, if you eliminate one of the enemy players, they eventually are able to come back to the game. But if you eliminate an RTS player, they're gone from the game. So we're going to try to make it so that all players are still going to be in the game at all times and still be able to contribute to some extent. Another difficulty with Team RTS is the idea that really there's 3 players in a 3v3, and then you have 3 opposing players on the opposite team, and it's very difficult to keep track of both what your resources are, what your position in the game is, what your allies' positions in the game are, and what your opponent's positions in the game are. So with a more open rule set of Annihilation, this discourages players from really learning more about the enemies. And we really want to encourage players to interact with enemies and really get on top of what everyone is building, and therefore make the appropriate counters, make the right decisions based on game information that is available.
Oh, that's super interesting. And yeah, it does feel like there's definitely going to be some fun challenges. I'm looking forward to seeing how you guys decide to solve with like trying to design a competitive RTS mode. But I already like a lot of the stuff that I'm hearing. I guess just take a step back because there's so much to talk about, and I feel like we're gonna probably have some more check-ins later if you end up being up for it. But I do want to actually just talk a little bit about the balance, kind of, I guess, the pacing for balance updates and things like that. That's a core part of a lot of competitive modes that we end up seeing, and there's so many different studios that have taken very different approaches on this. Most notably, a lot of people who I know will probably be watching this are StarCraft 2 fans, and as you're very familiar with, having done a little bit of this for StarCraft 2 as well, StarCraft 2 balance pacing, especially in the earlier days with David Kim, was definitely a lot more on the more minimal side. It was kind of reacting to whatever balance updates need to be happen and let the players kind of figure out the rest. But I know there's been a lot more games. Dota is a really great example where they have really massive patches that almost fundamentally change the game. Like, what kind of direction is your headspace at right now when thinking about the future for this?
Yeah, I would say let's start with the philosophy behind the balancing in StarCraft 2. And I would say, at least back in my time on StarCraft 2, the thinking there was we wanted to do more minimalist balance changes for two reasons. The first is that we wanted to respect the legacy of StarCraft 1. And StarCraft 1 was a game that is known for never receiving balance patches up to a certain point. And the players and the fans created the balance via the maps. And they really enjoyed that their game was static, and you could have this approach of mastery to master your craft in an ever constant game. So I think a lot of the decision making behind StarCraft 2's balance was rooted in the desire to respect that philosophy. Secondly, on the StarCraft 2 team, we're always wary of breaking the game into unfixable state. So therefore, we never knew like when the last balance patch potentially could have been. So we were always careful to kind of maintain the game in a state where whenever we took our hands off the keyboard, the game would still be in a fairly okay state. So that is the past. Let's talk about the future. So with regards to the future, we definitely do recognize that even though there is a segment of players that want that mastery, and we definitely respect that segment, and we want our games to remain somewhat static for a given amount of time. We also respect that there's a number of players that is excited about new things, new shiny things, especially content creators such as yourself. So what we plan to do with our balance patches is we're still going to take the approach of we're going to feel it out. If something feels completely broken, we're definitely going to step in there. But at the same time, we're also going to align balance patches with content updates. Something that we've talked about, I don't know how much your audience is aware of this, but we're going to move to a free-to-play model where there are constant content drops. There are seasons, and we're going to align those seasons along with the tournaments as well. So at the end of a tournament season, we're going to try to have a content drop, and along with that, there's going to be new updates to co-op. There's going to be new campaigns, and there potentially could be new balance patches, so that the player base is always aware of when the next big drop could potentially be.
Yeah, that actually sounds pretty exciting, and I'm really looking forward to that seasonal style. One of the questions I have about that is, when you're talking about potentially having these larger changes and stuff that'll be coming forward, I guess, what kind of order of magnitude are we talking about for potentially large changes? Because I think one of the things that comes to mind for me is you talk about MOBAs, and you could say, yeah, we're going to redesign a bunch of these characters. We're going to, change a lot of the stats or the way that the map works and everything. But I think that probably in a lot of ways has a lesser impact than, say, we have a game with 2 to 4 or however many races we end up having. You change some of the ways that race works. It fundamentally changes large chunks of the game. So, I mean, are we talking about removing units? Are we talking about changing abilities? Like, what's kind of the order of magnitude I think you would expect?
Yeah, so as with everything in this interview, we're still working on it. We're in still relatively early phases, but right now, a lot of stuff is up for grabs, and we could see, for example, new units into the game at content drops, or the replacing of units in the game. Anything is really up there.
Oh man, that's actually pretty exciting, and I think it'll be pretty fun. I think one kind of follow-up question on that is, I know that competitive modes, especially, you were kind of talking about the seasonal drops, and I was also speaking with Torch on another interview that should also be available at some point. I don't know if it's before or after this, but we were talking kind of about competitive seasons for esports events, and a lot of those tournaments and everything happening kind of in line with a lot of the content drops and stuff. What are some of the design challenges when trying to create a system that's going to have like these potentially large changes? But you know that there's also a lot of these pro players who are effectively like dependent on still needing like their skill set at the game to be reliable, that the top performers for the last patch, outside of, you know, patch players and stuff that we always like to joke about and everything, like that they're still going to have that reliable ability to still be competitive at the top level.
Yeah, so anything regarded to esports, Trevor would definitely be the better person to talk to. But our initial thinking right now is that with these new updates, with these new content drops, we're not necessarily going to release them into the wild, into the pro scene initially. And we're going to have a testing phase where like you can try out these new units and new ideas in a custom game, for instance, but we're not necessarily going to feature them in esports. And after that testing phase, when players feel, oh, this is like reasonably balanced, then we might release them into the wild, I would say.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm a huge fan of that idea. That's great. I think another really big question on a lot of people's minds, and this is something that I think you guys even posed as a question that people were responding to on your subreddit and everything, was the discussion around hero units and whether or not this RTS is going to move more in the direction of, say, Warcraft 3, where you have these hero units the game kind of revolves around in a lot of ways, versus StarCraft 2, where there's either no hero units or kind of like semi-hero units like a mothership and stuff. What's kind of the direction that you guys are leaning on in that regard?
Yeah, again, a preface that everything here is still working on everything. But right now we are experimenting with heroes in all of our game modes. That includes cooperative, campaign, and competitive. We think there's a lot of benefits to heroes, but the two negatives that players have pointed out over and over again in our subreddit is the idea that hero units, A, can be over-centralizing, and B, they can be snowbally. And I think those two are especially prominent when you're talking about Warcraft 3 heroes. Whenever we talk about heroes, I think it's important to consider that there's a very wide spectrum of what a hero is, all the way from no heroes at all to, I would say, almost the end of the spectrum is what is considered Warcraft 3 heroes with an EXP system, with leveling, with items. And where we ended up, or where we're ending up right now, or at least in the current iteration, is the idea of heroes that are more like just special units that don't necessarily gain too much power over time and don't overly centralize the game. We still want to give you a ton of opportunities to multitask across the map, and we don't want all your opponents, all your kills to be tracked as a progress bar, an experience bar on your hero. So the closest thing I would say it's going to be somewhat like a Mongol Khan. I used to use a mothership core in this example, but I know okay, the mothership core is actually a reason that I initially quit the game, so I'm very wary that that is not the most favorable comparison.
Well, as someone who used to love my mothership core and pylon rushing my opponents, I'm a little saddened to hear that, but I'll live on because I still have all of my other extremely cheesy playstyles and everything like cannon rushing and DTs, which actually does bring me into my next question. As much as I am a lover of some of that stuff and doing it, I know that it can be a very frustrating experience for my opponents, as I've learned very, very verbally from many of them. Kind of what are your thoughts around, I guess, like frustrating playstyles or cheesy playstyles a lot of the time that can be really demoralizing to be on the receiving end on?
Yeah, one of our goals with Stormgate is that we want the game to be very approachable. So we want to make sure that there's not a textbook of knowledge that you need to know before playing the game. Some of those things include being forced to wall off, for instance. Even at the pro level, you often see players move their zealot like half a pixel over too far, and then a swarm of zerglings runs in and you automatically lose the game. And think about this from a new player perspective. How are they even supposed to know that they're supposed to wall off at your natural or even at your main? So we want to purposely remove some of the knowledge required to get to that point. We want to take a lot of inspiration from games such as Warcraft 3 or like Age of Empires and Company of Heroes, where there is somewhat of an innate defense in that your buildings, your initial base, like you have in Warcraft 3, you have a burrow, for instance, and it can kind of shoot. It's not that powerful, but it will ward off any like a game-ending damage early on. And we feel like just these innate defensive mechanics are going to allow players to at least progress to the middle stages of the game and play the quote unquote what some players consider a relatively honorable macro game. And with your idea with DTs, for instance, I'm very sad to say that our initial design for cloaking in the game is going to be somewhat more similar to that of Warcraft 3 or a lot of MOBAs where cloaking, when you attack something, you break your cloak and you essentially get out of cloak. So you still have the potential to do sneaky plays, but it won't necessarily have to deal game-ending damage each time.
It makes a lot of sense. You know, I'll be a little saddened to hear that, but I'll just have to get better at it and be sneaky in other ways, I guess. I appreciate that.
Yeah, but at the same time, like we still want the opportunity to be aggressive at all times. Like I gave a lot of examples for early game defense, and we feel like Warcraft 3 kind of nails the balance between strong early game defense and the opportunity to still kill your opponents. Whereas a game like Company of Heroes, the turrets are extremely strong early game, and there's no way to kill your opponents. So I definitely recognize there's a balance in there somewhere.
No, I really like that, and I think that's cheese, especially in different RTS titles and stuff in the past, has been a core component, especially for competitive modes, especially when we start getting into like esports and everything, to, you know, make sure your opponent's just not being super greedy. So I really like that. Well, cool, Kevin. I have so many more questions, but I do want to make sure that you have time to go do all the other crazy amount of things that I'm sure you have coming up this week. So I do want to give you a chance to say, first of all, I want to say thank you to you. And second of all, I want to give you a chance to say, what can people do if they're interested in Frost Giants? Like, are there any places they can go to, I don't know, sign up for the beta or provide feedback on Frost Giant ideas as you guys come up with your newsletters and stuff?
Well, if this is the third or fourth interview that you've seen from Frost Giant and Fear Dragon, I apologize. But if this is your first video, do I have a great surprise for you? Did you know that you can sign up for our beta at playstormgate.com? And not only can you do that, you'll be able to also sign up for our newsletter. And don't forget, if you wishlist our game on Steam, then you help spread the word to everyone about our game, and you help spread that RTS love. Not only that, you can tell all your friends, hey, do you have Twitter? DM them. Do you have WhatsApp or text message? Tell everyone about Stormgate and help spread the word.
All those links are going to be in the description below, guys. So it's nice and easy for you to go ahead and click and check out. If you guys are interested, go check out the Stormgate beta once it comes out, and go check out all the other random interviews, not just from me, from other people who have been talking with these wonderful folks. But thank you so much, Kevin. It was such a pleasure as always. And until next time, cheers.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Special thank you to Eric the Man 10 for supporting me on Ko-Fi.